Hi, everyone. I haven't made a video live in quite a while, so I thought today would be a fine day to do that. So we're getting close to Christmas, and Merry Christmas to you. And here, what I'm going to do today is I am going to review portions of videos that are from Unbelievable from Justin Brierley's channel and a conversation that he had with Stephen Woodford, who's also known as Rationality Rules, and also the debate on the Modern Day Debate channel between Stuart and Cliffe Knechtle and Phil Halper and Alex O'Connor. Alex O'Connor is also known as the Cosmic Skeptic, and that is going to be what we're going to do today. And so we're going to address a couple of major points made in the debate, and we're also going to look at the issue of divine hiddenness, which Stephen Woodford laments. And so we're going to start off with a really good question that Justin Brierley asked Stephen Woodford. And so you've come to the right place. If you like this kind of content, please like, subscribe, and keep coming. Here we go.
This is a very hypothetical question, but I'm always interested to hear, though, how people like Hitchens and Stephen Fry have answered it when they've been asked. But say you did die and it turns out there is a God and you kind of had a chance to say something to God, what would you say?
It's a good question. I think I would ask, God, why have you created a world that seems to so many people like me to not have your presence in? And if you're going to issue punishments and rewards based on this, please explain to me how on earth you're justifying that in terms of morality, because neither of those propositions make any sense to me. As your child, please enlighten me before you send me into the darkness. At least give me my answer.
So Justin didn't answer him, actually. And so I wanted to answer. I wanted to offer a few things there. Justin decided to do it where he was not going to debate that point, he said. And so he decided instead he was going to sort of move on. So what I'm going to do that I think is pretty useful for this exercise is ask the question of, does God exist? And the short answer is yes. And the long answer is yes. Anyway, no, the idea with this is I think he's asking a really good question. This is the problem of what people have called divine hiddenness. And you even have examples of people like Mother Teresa or Saint Teresa of Calcutta also lamenting that she sometimes didn't feel God's presence. And I have personal experiences where I feel like God was much more evident at certain points in my life than at other points in my life. So I can understand that it doesn't seem always like God is always around. And I noticed that Cliffe and Stuart Knechtle also commented sort of similarly. And so what I can say is when Stephen does get to the end of his life, it's my belief that Jesus will give everybody, every single person on the globe, an opportunity to accept his offer of salvation. And I believe that it'll occur probably in the flash of a moment. And what many believe right now is that when you get to the end point of your life, you're going to have an illumination of conscience in which you see your life, your entire life through the eyes of Jesus, and that you'll judge yourself as far as where you feel you deserve to go. And so if Rationality Rules gets to that point, and he, even at that one point, in the right towards the very end of his life, right before he dies, he gets that flash of a moment. It is my hope that he and other atheists decide that, yes, I will accept your offer of divine salvation, Jesus. I want to be with you for the rest of eternity. He'll be like that thief on the cross, basically, right at the end, who says, wait a second, I've got a little change of heart here. Maybe God now is opening this door to heaven to me, even to me. And so that is just something with the divine hiddenness. The other problem and the other issue in this other debate video is going to be on the problem of evil. And so there was a debate that I'm going to show you in just a moment. But before I do, I wanted to say thank you for everybody who's coming in here today or who's listening, even if you're listening later on, not live. I appreciate that you're here. And so let's take a look at, and then I also, before I forget, I want to mention, I'm also going to make a few comments about Myth Vision and the fellow who made a video about me. So I wanted to comment about that because he says that I didn't properly represent Myth Vision. I didn't, Derek Lambert. And so I'm also going to talk a little bit about that. So I don't want to forget to mention that little nugget there. And so here we go. Let's take a look at, we're going to take a look at this other debate. And so And then we'll talk a little bit more on some of the questions also that were addressed in the Stephen Woodford video, because I actually listened to the whole thing today. And I also listened to this, which is the Modern Day Debate channel. And here we go. So first we're going to listen to, first let me tell you who these people are. So you can see right here, we have Cliffe Knechtle and Stuart Knechtle. Apparently they are pastors. I believe they're pastors, and they have a lot of experience in debating atheists. And here they are in a debate with an atheist that happened right a few days ago, actually December 12th, I believe. And then the atheists are Alex O'Connor, who's got a channel called Cosmic Skeptic, and Phil Halper. And so let's first listen to Cliffe's part of the debate, because I thought that Cliffe's opening statement was very strong. And I concur with Glenn Scrivener. I actually listened to Glenn Scrivener's commentary on this, that this part of Cliffe's debate was very strong. So let's have a listen.
The reason that I believe in the biblical God is, first of all, I believe that non-existence cannot produce existence. That's absurd. Secondly, I don't think it's possible for chaos to produce order. That's ridiculous. Thirdly, I don't believe that it's possible for the rational to be created by the non-rational. The rational points me to a rational creator. Next point is, I don't think that meaning comes from matter, or that love comes from matter, or that free will comes from matter. Matter is simply matter. And when I observe people, when I experience life, I'm convinced that there is more to reality, there's more to you, there's more to me than simply complex chemical reactions, than simply matter. Then when I look at Jesus Christ, I begin to understand that indeed he is reliable. No, I cannot prove God, I cannot prove Christ. That's not the question. I can prove almost nothing in life. Rather, the question is, in light of the evidence, what is most reasonable, what is most plausible to believe? And when you look at the historical evidence of the way Jesus lived, taught, died, and rose from the dead, I think the evidence is rather clear. He is trustworthy in a way that none of the options are. Whenever I struggle with doubt, and I regularly struggle with doubt, I go over some of the points that I just made, but I also go over the alternatives to Christ, be it materialism, atheism, evolution, agnosticism, Hinduism, Buddhism, Islam. And although there are points that can be made on behalf of all of those options, those points are nothing when it comes to credibility, when it comes to reasonableness, when it comes to reliability that support Jesus Christ. He lived a sinless life. In my best moments, I wish that I could live like Jesus, but I fail miserably. He taught amazing teachings. Robert Coles, professor emeritus at Harvard, pointed out that all the teachings on ethics over the past 2,000 years are simply footnotes to the Sermon on the Mount. He not only lived an amazing life, not only taught an amazing life, but he died an incredible death. At the moment of his most excruciating pain, instead of cursing his enemies the way I would have, he prayed, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." But fourthly, and most importantly, not only did he teach amazing teachings, not only did he live an amazing life, not only did he die an amazing death, forgiving his enemies who nailed him to the cross, but fourthly, and most importantly, the historical evidence is 3 days after he died, he rose from the dead. So due to that evidence, I am convinced that Jesus Christ is reliable in a way that none of the options are.
I wanted to just comment on this really quickly. So I think one of the really important things that Glenn Scrivener actually pointed out, he was reviewing this same video and he was reviewing this statement, and he pointed out the success of Christianity actually speaks volumes when you consider Jesus's origins. So he came out of this little podunk place in the middle of the ancient Near East around 2,000 years ago. He was a nobody. He was a carpenter. He didn't have a force. He wasn't a king. He wasn't a political person. He wasn't a huge personality with a bunch of powerful followers. He was followed. He set it up so he had 12 apostles, and they were also pretty much nobodies, fishermen and tax collectors and sinful people, if you want to call it that. And so how is it possible that he was able to do what he did? Within the first 300 years, you had between 5 and 6 million people following without any legal protections. It wasn't until 313 that Constantine made it legal to practice Christianity in the kingdom. And then after that, about 50 to 60 million people. The interesting thing is it goes back to Gamaliel in the book of Acts. Gamaliel said that if this is of man, it will die out. And we saw that happen in many cases. But if it is of God, you will not be able to stop it. Christianity is the way, the truth, and the life, and it's everything that we believe. And going back to Rationality Rules for a moment with its divine hiddenness problem, if you did, and I know that Rationality Rules seems like a pretty nice guy. He was talking about how the truth is really important to them. And it's kind of like the idea with Pilate saying, what is truth? Everyone should actively seek the truth. And if you do, in an honest way, with your eyes wide open, you will find Jesus. That's just what happens. And so we're going to talk a little bit about the genetic fallacy and the genetic fallacy in a few minutes with Alex O'Connor. But the real truth is you have to seek out the truth. Ask God to answer you. So if you know that God exists, which we all deep down do, then ask him to answer you. Ask him to answer your prayers and show you the truth. And he will do it. When you're ready, he'll send a message. He'll send a teacher. He did that to me. And so I know he'll do it to everybody if you ask in an honest way and you really want to find the truth. Because whether you're born in India or you're born in China or Thailand or anywhere in the world, you have access to the truth. And I think that's what happens. A lot of people are born into one place. They might be born into one religion. And at some point in your life, and usually it's in your teens, people start seeking the truth. They really want to know the truth. And it took me a while. It took me until actually not my teens. It was more like my early 40s when I really sat down and said, I need to know the truth. And so God sent a preacher, actually right on a plane. And I've talked about that many times, so I won't go into that right now. So let's continue here. I want to say hi to Otangelo Grasso. Otangelo has made some really good videos on the Shroud of Turin. He's very interested in the Shroud of Turin. And that, if anyone, if you want to talk about evidence for Jesus, holy cow, the Shroud of Turin is it. More and more studies are coming out to highlight the authenticity of the Shroud of Turin based on scientific reasons. And so it's just something to look into if you want to see actual evidence of Jesus's existence and also of his resurrection, because his image was sort of burned, if you will, by a bright light onto the shroud. It's really an amazing thing, and kind of the nuclear level power of light. So let's go back to this video and listen a little bit more here.
Now, there are two good reasons that I know of to reject the biblical God. The first one is my pride. My pride dictates that nobody is going to tell me how to live my life. And I have a deep resentment towards anybody or anyone who wants to tell me how to live my life.
I want to comment a little bit about that. The one thing about Cliffe and Stuart, and actually Glenn highlighted this a little bit, but the one thing about them is, number one, look at their camera angle versus, say, the camera angle of Alex and Phil. Look at their lighting versus the lighting of Alex and Phil. Alex and Phil sort of have it set up pretty nicely here. And Cliffe and Stuart could use a little work there, actually. If they had the camera just at a little bit better of an angle, that would be more ideal. And so that's just one point. But also to highlight his comment about pride, he's right. Pride is the root of all evil. Pride is the source and of all other deadly sins. Pride is a big problem. Lucifer had a problem with pride, and look what happened to him. And so that's definitely a big problem. But the one thing about Cliffe right here is he's not coming off as the gentle, kind, innocent as a dove Christian here. He's coming off a little bit sharp, a little bit salty. And I know that sometimes people think it's a good idea to have a salty approach. I've definitely listened to some interesting people online who've got a very salty approach. I know I've had salty Christians on my channel before, but I think the approach, if you're on the fence and you're trying to just look at the demeanor of the participants here, and if you just look at that and you're sitting on the fence right between them and you don't have a choice, I think you might actually prefer the demeanor of Alex and Phil here, because they actually seemed much more like, look at how they are right here. They seem humble, kind. They look pretty innocent, actually. And so you look at that, and that's something that I would say in the future, Cliffe, you might want to think about just changing it a little bit. A little later, you came off a little bit harsh. And so if you happen to watch this video, you might want to change some of your approach right here.
But I've got to get over that pride, and I've got to be willing to face reality. And if reality is that God really exists, it would be wise for me to listen to God and not to have such a knee-jerk reaction that in my arrogance and pride, I cannot obey him. I must be king. I must be God of my life. And it's that pride that I understand, because I struggle with it, that I'm afraid is the primary reason that people are atheists or agnostic. And it's the primary reason that I, as a follower of Christ, struggle with doubt. I struggle with obedience to Christ because I think I have a better way. And then, of course, there's a problem of evil. And some of my atheist friends say, yeah, that's really why I can't accept the biblical God, because the problem of evil. Friends, if there is no God, there is no problem of evil. There's no problem of good. There just is. Everything just is. And it's all relative. It's all subjective. And to talk about an axiomatic morality is not acceptable for me because it's essentially moral relativism. It depends who you trust to define what's axiomatic in morality and what's not. So it's either moral relativism or there is some type of objective morality because there's a mind that creates and defines that morality long before this human mind ever existed. When I look at Jesus Christ examining the human dilemma, we're all created in the image of God. We all have a whiff of glory, a scent of glory in us. We also all have a real fascination with evil that comes from our pride. It comes from our feeling it's necessary to be number one. And when you begin to grapple with, we all have a whiff of wretchedness in us, but we all have a whiff of glory in us. We're created in the image of God. And the image of God is crucial. It's one of the most important ideas that the Bible communicates, that we all have intrinsic innate value and dignity. Because
I can definitely agree with that. So I think we've got a pretty good summary of Cliffe's, and also Stuart's argument was pretty similar to this. So very good arguments. I like the upfront statements. But I'm going to take you over now to, we're going to look at a little bit more on this. I'm going to get to the point where we see some of Alex's talks, because it's kind of similar to Phil. Phil talked a lot about animal suffering, and he asked this question: why did God choose suffering of humans and animals? Like in this universe, in a universe that he sees as a problem, he sees suffering and pain in this universe. And one of the things that you have to know with Jesus is Jesus came to show us exactly what God wants of us. Through suffering, we become stronger spirits, stronger souls. It's soul building. A lot of people talk about that, but it's actually true. And Jesus himself exemplified. He said, even before he was on his cross, and everyone knew what crosses were, they knew the harsh reality of what the cross was. He told us we had to bear our own crosses if you wanted to follow him. And he also said, and this is again, and it strikes me that he said this before he was even on the cross, but he also said that the meek will inherit the world. He said a number of different things. He said those whom much has been given, much is expected. He exemplified suffering when he, again, was carrying that cross. He was beaten by whips over tons of times, where it got to a point on the Shroud of Turin is evidenced in that you can see all kinds of, the biblical the bloody evidence and all that stuff. So anyway, he was beaten many, many times, and he epitomized true suffering and then true glory. So God raised him up. And so that's the human condition. Even Buddhism figured that out. Life is suffering. But if you think we live through life with no purpose and suffering has no purpose, that's a pretty sad state of way to be, state of thought. It's thinking that there's no purpose behind all of the suffering that people go through. Many of the saints in history have endured extreme suffering and years of pain. And so you have that kind of thing, or even last minute. So suddenly you have people like Peter being hung upside down on a cross. You have St. Paul, who was beheaded. You have all of these other disciples. I ask Alex and Phil and Rationality Rules Stephen and Myth Vision Derek and Michael Beverly a question that's pretty important. And I really want you to think about this. When you posit that Jesus was a mere mortal and that he died and that death served no purpose, ask yourself what the early apostles, who had the pleasure of actually being with Jesus for several years, watching Jesus's miracles and taking up their own crosses. And in almost all cases, they were martyred in pretty gruesome ways. Why did they do that? If they didn't think they were following the way, the truth, and the life, they would not have given up their lives for that cause. You really need to think about that. When you're posing, Derek, that this is just a myth and a legend and there's not truth behind it, you've made a video now that's called The True Myth, which is a response to C.S. Lewis. When you do that kind of stuff and you don't examine honestly the surrounding environment of the early Christianity an early Christian movement, then you're going to come up with a false belief. And unfortunately, you have that false belief. And so do Phil and Alex. But let's go on. We're going to listen right here. I think I've got it marked at 33, where we're going to see some of what Alex O'Connor has to say.
Yeah, maybe I can respond to Stuart. You did something which I like to call the genetic fallacy. Of course, it is fallacious to suggest that because you came to a belief through an unreliable method, that belief must be false. That's not quite what I'm saying. Because, of course, in the case of God and belief in God, we're told that there is a God who proactively wants people to come to know him and is in charge of the systems by which people engage with each other and learn about the world. And so if it is the case that you are, and of course, you said that 75% of people, reject the religions of their parents. That means that there are 25% who don't, and you're just one of those. You may be an exception, but it's an exception that proves the rule, right? And the rule is that you can reliably predict what somebody will believe about God, and therefore, on your worldview, how correct or incorrect they are in their assessment of the nature of the divine, based on where they grow up. And my question, I can't now, of course, that doesn't mean that it's false because they came to it through those methods. But I would say that it's unexpected that God would allow people to go so wrong, so inculpably wrong as well, if in fact he wants to reveal himself equally to everybody. The question I have is, what is more likely? What better explains the reliable geographical spread of religious belief? Is it that there is a God who wants to come to know all equally, but for some reason, nations of people and cultures throughout history unanimously decide on different theologies, and many of them get it wrong, and some of them happen to get it right?
This is actually a pretty good question. And so I want to just kind of take a stab at it. So it is the idea, it's true that if you're born in certain parts of the world, you're more likely to be following whatever the belief systems that are prevalent in those parts are. For example, if you're born in India, you're pretty likely to be a Hindu. If you're born in China, you might be an atheist, or you might be a Buddhist or something like that. You might believe in Tao, the Tao in those different places. But, and then if you were born into the Muslim world, into the Arab world, what's interesting about Christianity is we're not exactly located right now in just one major geographic area, unlike Hinduism, which is pretty much located and concentrated in around India, and the Arab region where you can see the Muslim world. There is a Muslim world, and it's pretty much concentrated in this very small region. Christianity is spread all over the world. You can find Christians in every single nation of the world, although it's getting more difficult in many of the Muslim nations for Christians to live. But Christianity has spread. It's everywhere. It's global. And we've left where we originally started. So we originally started in the area around Jerusalem, and we spread all over the world from there, starting going over to Europe. And then now we're really over there in Africa. People are making a big splash over in China. So Christianity has spread. Jesus called on us to go to all corners of the world and spread the good news. And right now he's done a pretty good job. We've got over 2 billion believers in the world. And that's very significant. So we have more Christians in the world than any other faith, and it's a growing system. Now, it might be dying in certain parts of the world, like unfortunately, where Alex is from. And so if you're over in the United Kingdom, we see a spread of atheism, although Justin Brierley's written a book that's refuting that point and saying there's a growth or a spurring of Christianity. But again, we are growing, and it just keeps getting larger. As I said initially, we were between 5 and 6 million, around 300 years into it. And suddenly it's between 50 and 60 million in the 4th century, and then on and then on and then on. So it's getting bigger. And I think it's because people seek the truth. And when they do that, Jesus opens their eyes. He opens the door to the truth. Okay, so I also want to come back to that chat for a second to say hi to, we got Alexis Carroll in here. We've got, I don't know if Otangelo's still in here. And we've got, let's see who else here. GP Banjo. So let's see what it says. I don't think Cliffe is trying to sound salty. That's just how he talks. Okay, well, maybe, I think maybe it's not in that portion of the video quite as much, but I think maybe it might be a little bit later in the video, or maybe I misspoke because I was speaking about this point, but actually you might see it a little bit later. I'm new to this channel. Are you Catholic? Yes, I am Catholic. I'm a Catholic revert. I was born a Catholic, raised a Catholic, married in the Lutheran Church. And I want to say hi to Hallelujah. Hi, Craig. Hi, everybody. Good to see all of you. But then I was a Baptist for 10 years, but then I came back to Christianity. So hi, everybody. So Alexis Carroll says, how embarrassing that certain atheists use Santa as a gotcha when he's just really St. Nicholas of Myra from the 4th century. Talk about historical illiteracy amongst that community. Yeah, I think it's a shame when people. It's also like saying that, you know, we aren't allowed to put Christmas trees up because this passage in the Bible that really doesn't have anything to do with Christmas, or claiming that Jesus' birth narratives are conflicting when they aren't. If you read Luke first and then you read Matthew, and you understand that Matthew's over a 2-year period of time, because Herod said he was killing all the kids under 2, then you can say that they didn't conflict at all. And so it's one of those things where people find conflicts where there aren't any. And it's usually when they don't understand that they've got some assumptions packed into the cake there. So, okay, so let's go back. I'm gonna listen to this. Yeah, and I apologize if I spoke a little, if it came across a little bit on there with but I'm gonna go now to minute 1 hour and 21 minutes in, because I had another little comment that we want to make right here.
Animals.
Course in communication. I never said it was Lucifer's fault. I never said it was Adam and Eve's fault. I said there are consequences to created beings flipping God off and telling God to get lost. It's not the devil's fault. It's not Adam and Eve's fault. It is a consequence of created beings choosing to live their life separate from God. So I don't blame devil.
So which created beings are we talking about? Which ones? Sorry. Which ones are we talking about?
What I said.
Which ones are we talking about, Cliff? Sorry. Which created beings? If it's not Lucifer, it's not Adam and Eve, who are we talking about?
Obviously, there are also demons who rebelled against God, the demonic.
So it's their fault.
That would...
Like, Phil's question is specifically the suffering of non-human animals before Homo sapiens arrived on the scene. To say, you know, 450,000 years ago, an animal suffering. Why? Who is it that rebelled that bring this about?
I do not know. What I do know is the consequence of free, autonomous individuals rebelling against God is chaos, unfairness, injustice fills the gap.
That comes later, because that's when humans come on the scene. But we're talking about whether we would expect to find, before humans even arrive on the scene, let alone afterwards, billions of years of suffering and death and destruction with no human beings, no Adam and Eve, no even like moral agents to do this kind of stuff. Like the only options available are that somehow these animals are responsible for rebelling against God in some way, or there's some kind of pre-human existing demons or Lucifer, in which case you would be blaming it on them, or the answer is you simply don't know, in which case sounds again like a bit of an appeal to agnosticism.
So I think the question of animal suffering, I find it so interesting. It's interesting because Alex O'Connor is a vegetarian, as far as I know, unless he's changed that. But he's a vegetarian, I think, because he cares for animals. And to talk about animal suffering, then we all start thinking about Bambi. But think about the many years that some animals have wandering through the woods and eating and grazing and having fun with their animal friends. And then suddenly, unfortunately, they might get killed or eaten. And that happens. And that's just the system. That's just the way it is. When humans came about, we started sacrificing animals. Many humans started sacrificing one another, which is really awful. But we were told to sacrifice animals by God. We were sacrificing lambs. The Jewish people were sacrificing lambs, starting with the Passover. And in the books that you'll notice in the first few books of the Bible, we talk in Leviticus, for example, of different sacrifices that God wanted. You had to bring a dove to the temple. You might have had to bring a cow to the temple if you had a lot of sins. There's all these different sorts of sacrifices that were through the ages, going all the way back to Cain and Abel. And so I guess the point is, why did God create a system like that? Well, it's just the way it is. And so he felt that this is the best way that we were going to get to heaven, and that we were going to understand him as well as we can possibly understand him, and understand Jesus, is to create a system of suffering, because suffering does build souls. When you think about the times in your life when you've had the most difficult challenges and you've had to overcome really difficult situations, a lot of times you emerge a lot stronger. And so you become a stronger person based on some of the challenge that you experience in your life. And it helps you grow. It helps your soul grow. And so I think that can speak to why that God created the system he did. I do want to point out then, unfortunately, something else that's going on here. Throughout this debate with Alex and Phil, they say quite a bit. It seems like Alex and Phil, They want to point to the Bible. They want to claim that there's contradictions in the Bible. I don't believe there's any provable contradictions in the Bible. I'll stand behind what Dr. Hugh Ross has said too. He says the same exact thing. But the foundation of their thing is kind of like they don't like the God of the Bible. And so, and I think that's the bottom line that drives them. And they assume that we should live in a world that's sort of all pleasure and no pain. But again, like what I said, suffering helps build souls. And so that kind of world will exist at some point, but that's what we call heaven. And that's what we're to be working for. So I want to say hi to people in the chat here. Let's see who we have. I see some new people. Hold on one second. Let's go down. So we've got Alexis Carroll, GP Banjo. I don't know if Otangelo's still here. Craig, hallelujah. But then down here, we've also got Calming Waves, Julian. And I don't say, as far as the popularity idea with Christianity, I'm not claiming that because Christianity has 2 billion followers that it's true, because somebody could make a counterclaim and says, well, because Islam has 1.5 billion followers, then Islam's true. That's not the claim that I'm making. I'm saying that it is the truth when you seek the truth, and the world is becoming increasingly Christian in many parts. Overall, we've got over 2 billion people right now, and we're growing in many ways, and it's because it is the truth. And so it's factual to go back to Jesus' resurrection and to look into that historically. Kip Davis, he is an atheist. He says undoubtedly SJ will also address the numerous egregious errors about the Bible and biblical scholarship promoted by the Knechtles. No, I'm actually, Knechtles and I don't see eye to eye on everything. I can say that. In fact, my name was brought up by Matt Dillahunty one time in a debate that he had with, I think it was Cliffe Knechtle, and Matt brought up that I said that there are these 5 sort of king demons, and I was just reflecting something that I'd heard from Father Chad Ripperger about these demons like Leviathan and Lilith and those other. There's a few others, I forget their names. Baphomet's one of them, but anyway, so they're kind of like the major forces in hell and this kind of stuff. And so that was brought up to Cliffe by Matt, and Matt, of course, doesn't believe any of that. And Cliffe, it doesn't also, he said, that's not something that he would agree to. So he didn't like what Father Chad Ripperger said. But anyway, so that's what it is. So we don't agree with anything with that particular point. So, it's Knechtle, really? Okay, so I guess we have a different pronunciation here. So thank you, Kip, for correcting me. It's Stuart and Cliffe Knechtle. All right, so let's listen to a little bit more of this.
That's baloney. That's not an appeal to agnosticism. It's instead a simple, humble statement that I really don't know. And for anybody to argue that they've got all the answers to all the difficult questions is the height of human arrogance. Now,
precisely.
Alex,
hold on. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry.
You have still not faced the impossibility of agnosticism when it comes to meaning and purpose in life, the value of a human life, ethics, and life after death. And you intentionally evade it. And I don't blame you, Alex. I'd do the same thing if I was sitting in your chair. But you still are going to have to put your head on your pillow tonight, and you're going to have to acknowledge I'm a pretty highly motivated guy. I wouldn't have gotten the education at Oxford that I have. I wouldn't work as hard as I do at being rational and logical. You are living for something. You have confidence in someone, Alex. Now, come on, just be honest with me and tell me where your confidence, your faith is.
I like that. I don't really even need to comment much more on that. Yes, Cliffe, actually, I mentioned this before Kip came on here. I did mention that unfortunately for a person who's sitting on the fence watching this, it does seem like Cliffe is coming across. If you listen to this whole debate, not just maybe the portions I've played, he does seem like he's coming across a little bit salty, and just the way his camera's positioned and everything else, it would have been more ideal had Cliffe had the nice lighting that Alex and Phil have. And if he had a much more like calm, pleasant, happy demeanor, like a joyous demeanor. I mean, here he knows the truth. And so it'd be ideal if he showed he knew the truth by expressing it in a beautiful, joyous way. And so I do want to say that. So I'm going to go right now and turn to Michael Beverly, because Michael Beverly decided to make a response, and I told him I'd make a response to his stuff. And so Michael Beverly is an atheist, and he did not like my response to, here it is, Copycat Jesus, this guy right here. Okay, so, I don't want to play George Harrison though, because I don't want my video to get ticked. Okay. So he says, I just don't know. Okay, here, let's get to this. Hold on. I've got this on.
So
Okay, hold
So
on.
already she starts off already.
Okay, so we're going to go to this. Hold on. I just want to come back, make sure I've got the thing. So let me preface this. So I made a video to Myth Vision, and I basically said, the idea that Jesus is a myth, that is really kind of the foundation of Derek Lambert's channel, is this notion that Jesus is merely a myth, and the myth is defined as something that's fictional and untrue and made up by people, if you define myth that way. C.S. Lewis said Jesus is the true myth. And he also has said things like, you can find little bits of truth in every faith system and every belief system. There are little bits of truth, or it wouldn't appeal to anybody. And so every belief system does have bits of truth. But C.S. Lewis called Jesus the true myth, and myth being defined as legend. Like, it's like saying the true legend. Jesus came to the world and he's changed the world, and he wanted to do that. And he showed us how to live, and he changed people from admiring the rich and the wealthy and thinking that they were so blessed by God, and understanding that God blesses many people in all walks of life, from the pits to the pedestals. And so let's listen. This person here didn't like my response. I also had been commenting on the inspiring philosophy conversation that was going on between IP, who's Michael Jones, and Derek Lambert on Myth Vision, because IP was kind of going into the weeds by saying, well, this particular myth maybe isn't so close to Jesus as you think it is. And I said, instead of asking all of those questions and examining the myths, what does it matter if the myth is very, very seriously like Jesus? Because Jesus might use nuts and bits from each of these myths as he shows his example. So as he's walking on water, or as he's converting water to wine, as he's doing all this kind of stuff, it doesn't mean that Jesus isn't true. Jesus didn't perform miracles, and Jesus didn't resurrect. So here we go. Let's get to what this person has to say. Now, I think he's funny. Okay.
Look, they have a front porch. Muslims, stupid. Hindus, stupid. Some Christians think Catholics are stupid and Calvinists are stupid.
And so what Derek has is a thesis, and his thesis basically states that as follows. Here's his thesis. If people and events in the New Testament about Jesus' life are similar to ancient myths that preceded them, then we should view the New Testament through the lens of mythology. In this context, mythology is defined as false stories made up by people.
No.
So today,
No. If people and events in the New Testament, stop. Presupposition. So already she starts off straw manning Derek's position in the utmost, in the highest. So in the real world, this is called.
It's interesting. He says I'm straw manning Derek's position, because I don't believe I'm straw manning Derek's position. Derek basically said that there are, walks like he's his famous thing with walks like a duck, talks like a duck. If you see a myth that's something like Mithras or these other different myths, Zeus and that kind of thing, then Jesus also is to be considered a myth, because there are other myths that people believed. He says something like that. And so he's going to go on and have kind of a very confusing response. But let's go ahead and see if he actually clarifies exactly what Derek believes, and if my statement was a falsehood, or even, as he gets more serious here with his allegations, a lie.
Lying. Now, I'm not going to, granted, this creator is making YouTubes in public, so I think she's fair game to attack you, but she doesn't know what she's talking about. She doesn't know. She has no concept, obviously. I mean, unless she's a mastermind and she's actually such a good grifter that she's pretending like she doesn't know so she can lie to her audience. She just doesn't know. If people and events in the New Testament is a presupposition. So she's already presupposing that the people and the events in the New Testament about Jesus's life are real things that happened, right? She's already presupposing that. And then she's saying, Derek is saying that if these things that really happened are kind of like ancient myths that preceded them, that Derek is saying we should view the New Testament things that really happened in the lens of mythology. And then she goes on to say mythology.
Notice he adds words to what I said. Did I say that really happened? I actually gave a quote to see exactly what I said. So to be able to debunk what I said by adding to what I said isn't really inappropriate. tool. But let's keep listening.
Apologies defined as false stories. Wait, never mind the insult that is to pagans, so-called pagans. People of other faiths besides Christianity. I always.
Now he's afraid of insulting people of other belief systems. Right off the gate, he actually accused Christians of being bigots, and he says that repeatedly through this video. It's actually kind of hard to listen to, I have to admit. I'm not sure if it's going to be a good piece of work as far as something that you find influential. I'm trying to make videos that help people more than anything else. I want to lead you in as far as I can towards the truth, which is Jesus. And so I'm going to move a little bit ahead here. I'm going to move a little bit ahead to, I don't want to have him singing George Harrow there. Let's get over to here.
That all the dying and rising gods are different. Well, duh. Does Mike Jones disagreeing with that? I don't think so, right? So once you acknowledge that, you can also acknowledge that different forms of copies of Shakespeare plays take different forms, and that also Shakespeare plays have influenced other things that aren't readily apparent as Shakespeare, and those things influence other things, so that once there's several iterations, the influence is kind of lost in the mix. You don't know exactly where. But here's the thing that Mike says at the end.
It's kind of sad because it seems like I won't comment.
And that's a lie. He says the Jews just wanted a Jewish dying and rising God. Where does he get that from? What Jews is he talking about? And what happens in Mark? Keep in mind, this is decades later. Mark has an empty tomb. That's it. There's no body. There's no resurrection. There's just an empty tomb. Now,
okay, that's the part I wanted to touch on. So the Gospel of Mark, some people believe the Gospel of Mark was written first, even though the early church fathers made pretty clear that the Gospel of Matthew was written first. It doesn't really matter that much if one's even written 6 months, 2 months, 2 years, 10 years, whatever it is. But we do know that they're early, and the best evidence that we have of the Gospel of Mark not being decades and decades later is, a lot of the atheists, people like Bart Ehrman, claim that all of these Gospels were written after the year 70, merely because of the existence of Jesus portending that the temple was going to be knocked down. And Jesus predicted that before he died in the year 33, and the temple was destroyed in the year 70. So the atheists, because they understand the theological implications of prophecies, decided that the books must be written after the year 70. Now, this character here, this Michael Beverly, believes that it's in the 2nd century that these were written, and that's even beyond what even the most skeptical scholars, New Testament scholars like Bart Ehrman say. He believes it's more like the 80s and 90s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. However, I believe we have good evidence within the text that it's all written, except for the Gospel of John, but Matthew, Mark, and Luke were definitely probably written prior to the year 64, and the evidence is in the book of Acts, because the two people who were the key roles in the book of Acts, who were crucified upside down, that's Peter, around the year 64, and Paul, who was beheaded sometime around the year 64, they're not mentioned. Those deaths aren't mentioned. Luke traveled with Paul starting in Acts 16 and reported the events in there, and Peter and Paul were the stars of those books. Now it's not like he doesn't want to mention deaths, because he did mention the martyrdoms of Stephen and of James, the son of Zebedee. So we have that. So that tells me that Luke was written probably prior to the year 64, and that Acts was written prior to the year 64, and then Luke preceded Acts. And of course, many believe that Matthew and Mark preceded that. And so that comes in pretty early. Now, as far as the longer ending of Mark, I've made another video on that, but we do have early evidence, even prior to the time, that the longer ending of Mark 16, after Mark 16, I think it's 8 to 20 or something like that. In the very last part of the book of Mark, it has a comment that they went to the empty tomb and the angel told them, he is not here, he has risen. So it's not like Mark doesn't say that Jesus hasn't risen. Mark does say that. And the women were bewildered at that point. The longer ending was not included in some of the codex. I want to say it's Vaticanus and Sinaiticus. It wasn't included in this 4th or 5th century big composition of the Bible. And so some claim that it was added later. However, numerous scholars have pointed to some early evidence and quotations from the early church fathers from the longer ending of Mark that came in the 2nd century. Okay, so we do have that. So even if it isn't included, even if you think it was added in later based on tradition, whatever it is, even if that's the case, we still have the other 3 gospels that gave us the rest of the story. So even if you ignored that. But that's one of the underlying propositions of some atheists. They say that the Gospel of Mark was the first to be written because they think it was written in a very fast way. It's a very short book, and that the others followed and embellished upon that. That's what the belief is. That's what the theory is. I don't think that theory is at all something that I consider true. So anyway, so here we have Craig says it's not clear at all what this particular guy is asserting, at least not to me. No, I'm not sure either. Skeptically pissed. That is an interesting name. So Otangelo, no, we have better evidence. You can't prove a word of what? Okay. If SJ is able to understand biblical scholarship better than Ehrman, then is God going to torture Ehrman forever for being stupider? No, I'm not saying that about Bart. I think Bart's a smart person. I think he's unfortunately actively suppressing the truth. And I think that some of his books, he started writing these books like misquoting Jesus, but it's interesting because it seems to me that he is misrepresenting Jesus in many cases. And so it's kind of a shame. I pray for people like Bart to get to heaven. In fact, I'll pray for all of you to get to heaven. I pray for myself to get to heaven too. But the reason why, what I'm hoping that all of you do is make the choice to seek the truth and do that kind of stuff. So why didn't I finish where does skeptically pissed go? Okay, let me see what else. All right, so I wanted to, because actually I was going to go see what Otangelo said was why I didn't finish that. Wait, what are these comments? Okay, I'm just coming into the comments here, trying to get my keys aren't working for some reason. Okay, all righty, let's see. Your definition of mythology is a straw man. No, I would go with the C.S. Lewis definition of mythology, and it kind of corresponds to legends. As you know, a person can be a legend, like I would say Tom Brady is probably somewhat of a legend. Michael Jordan is definitely somewhat of a legend. True person, amazing basketball player in one case and football player in the other. But I'm saying the idea of myth can be a legend where the legend can either be nonfiction, factual, or fiction. And I believe that in the case of the New Testament, that is all factual. And I believe in the case of Zeus and these other gods, those are all fictional. So they're different types of myths. And so let me go see what else Skeptically Pissed said, because you have an answer for everything, but an explanation of nothing. Use the same old argument. I guess I don't know if he's talking to me or if he's talking to Otangelo. Here, let me look back. Oh, he's talking to Otangelo. Okay, and so then we have probability function says, why would a God even bother to create the universe for itself if it didn't need to? Would it have stopped existing? Fitbit hadn't created the universe. I'm sure it doesn't mean Fitbit. Probably if he hadn't created the universe, would have suffered. Was it bored? No, I think that the idea is God wanted to create a universe and he wanted to give us full love because he is love. And he wanted to create a universe where we have free will. And through the free will in the Garden of Eden, unfortunately, the very first humans made the wrong decision, listening to the ancient serpent and eating of the apple, although we don't know if it was an apple and we don't know exactly what kind of fruit it was. But they ate of the tree of good and evil, and unfortunately then acquired knowledge of evil. And through their genes, it's passed down original sin. And so we all have original sin with a couple of important exceptions. And that's the situation. And so it carried down through Cain and Abel and more. And so we're living in a world where we have free will, but we're sort of cursed by sin. And one of the ways that we believe that we can receive salvation initially is to for one, you should be baptized. So if you haven't been baptized, you definitely want to go through that. And that can get you a little bit closer. And then 2, seek Jesus, seek the truth, and then you'll find Jesus. That's a thing like that. But again, we're put in a world that is full of sin. And so it also follows that it's full of suffering, because sin leads to suffering. If you start sinning and you consistently sin, you're going to suffer, and it's going to make your life much worse. And so that's just the way it is. So what do we have here? Joey, skeptically pissed. Where do atheists get their truth from? Okay, I'm not sure what Kip is responding to there. So, it's interesting, Kip. I probably should mention a few things about Kip Davis because you guys are seeing him here in the chat. Now, every once in a while, I will get an alert from the Academic Scholar 1 page that shows a writing that Kip Davis did or Josh Bowen did. It's kind of funny because it'll give me an alert to the kind of readings that sometimes I find. Because I usually do research in management fields, leadership and ethics and those kind of fields because that's related to my academic wheelhouse. However, I do enjoy reading some of the stuff in the journals that cover New Testament or the Old Testament. And so every so often I'll see these articles written by Kip. Now, Kip is a scholar of the Dead Sea Scrolls, and he has been making a big splash on his channel. He's got a lot of followers now. He's building up a channel. A lot of his stuff is responding to what he calls apologists, but he says it kind of in a way that doesn't make apologists, doesn't put them in a very good light, makes apologists seem like a snake oil salesman. And so I don't really think that that is a good approach because I think a lot of people truly, honestly, as apologists want to defend the faith and they want to do it in positive ways to bring people to Jesus. But anyway, so Kip has made a lot of videos and he just made one that I've been meaning to watch that was a response to somebody on the Myth Vision channel, and somebody is creating this terrible, terrible libel about Jesus, this horrible assertion about Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. And Kip basically said truthfully that this is ridiculous what this person created. So I won't give that person airtime by naming the person, especially because I forgot the name. So anyway, here's what we have. Calming Waves Julian says, if Ehrman is suppressing the truth, then God believes some humans who secretly believe in God and rather suffer excruciating pain forever than follow God. Why would God even create such humans? God creates people to give you an opportunity to follow him. And if that comes with free will. And so through free will, people choose to do one thing or the other. And so that's just the way the world works. In the very beginning, when God created all of the angels, as you probably know, about a third of them rebelled against him. They had free will and they chose to leave. They chose to be without God. And so God basically, they fell from heaven, if you want to call it that. Now, where did they fall specifically? Well, they fell to the earth. They're here. We're in the midst of a spiritual battle between good and evil. There are angels all among us. And unfortunately, there are demons among us. And so that's an existence that is true. You can see evidence of that in the persistence that some of these atheists have against Jesus. What do I mean? Well, you see some of the atheists, they're very persistent against Jesus. They don't want people to believe in Jesus. And you wonder why. Why aren't they so persistent against Krishna? Why aren't they talking about Buddha? Why aren't they talking about the God of Islam? Well, because I think they are persistent because we're in a spiritual battle and there's influences, good and bad, on people. And I think the demons are influencing people to not, they're always arguing against Jesus. And so that's kind of an interesting thing. So yeah, that's another thing. Constantine says, God does not want robots like the rulers of this world want us to be. Yeah, they would love it as for robots. If you notice, what was interesting is I was once sort of leaning to the left liberal. And that was not that long ago. That was probably about 15 years ago. I was kind of leaning to the left. And I officially dropped the Democrats in the year 2017 and became an independent. And I now would call myself a conservative. And I think it's interesting because as I grew closer to Christianity, I wanted conservative values. I wanted to conserve the values of the West, the traditional values of the West. I found the conservatism is really useful and religion is very useful. And religion has helped the West. And we're living on the fumes of Christianity in parts of the West, like especially in the United Kingdom and Norway and Sweden and places like that, and Germany, Australia. So we're living on that sort of thing. But that said, so lost my train of thought because I'm following this chat a little bit here. So let's see. Christ healed. Okay, let's see what we have here. Got some new people in the chat that I have never seen here. So welcome everybody here. I appreciate that you're coming by. Let's look at this. If God never gave us, would it really be love? Yeah, very good question. If God never gave us free will, Vade Kamat says, then would it be love? Wrong answer. This person is assuming what we see today is what God created. We live on what was once a cursed earth. Oh yeah, so that's what I was just saying about this influence in the world. So we live in the midst of a spiritual battle. And I think it's evidenced by, again, I think the atheists give us really strong evidence for Christianity, because I think that they're like continued videos covering Christianity time and time and time again speaks to sort of an inner turmoil that might be going on in their minds, because they do know the truth. Who created Archangel Michael's personality? Who created the devil's personality? God, right. God create, it's interesting with the angels, Saint Michael, no, not Saint Michael, Saint Thomas Aquinas said that each angel is its own species, because an angel doesn't give birth to another angel. They're not like the human species. They're each a species, which is kind of an interesting thing. So they're each unique in a different way. And so so they don't have personality from their parents. A lot of us have. They've shown in different studies. There's a study in the Journal of Organizational Behavior, for example, that talks about how our personalities are taken in part from our parents' personalities. So in other words, if your parent is very altruistic, you're more likely to be altruistic, or conscientious, you're more likely to be more conscientious, which is pretty interesting. So, but angels aren't like that. And so God created the angels. The angels had free will, and some of them decided that they wanted to sort of amp up the vices that they had, vices such as pride, while others decided they wanted to amp up the virtues that they have. And so you can play on both. We're all born with a propensity to show virtues or show vices, and so it's really a choice that people make. No, 2017 wasn't 14 years ago, but I was saying when I was really definitely more on the left-leaning liberal side was about 14, 15 years ago. That's about when I really came back to Christianity in a very strong way. And so going back to around 2010, 2011, that was where I was definitely speaking to the liberal side. Because morality is concerned with the survival of the human species, more specifically the success of civilization. So morality, people always wonder, do we have objective morality? Well, here's what I would say to that. And I would basically say, yes, we do have objective moral values. And I say that we all know, like many studies have shown, that every place in the world, when they've rank ordered different values, they found that, for example, among those values are benevolence, which is kindness to the in-group, and universalism, which is defined as kindness to the out-group. Those are the highest, according to Shalom Schwartz, 2012. So you can take a look at that. And if you have these values that seem to surpass generations and seem to transcend generations, and if we have these moral laws, it follows that we have a moral lawgiver, and that would be God. And so God doesn't move goalposts. God is still, and we seek God. That's what it is. So anyway, you're right. The West has benefited a lot from Christian colonialism. I am Kima says this. Vade Kamat says this is based on the assumption that God doesn't exist already. Is circular reasoning. Philip M says deism seems the most plausible apart from atheism. Well, I think if you're going to take a step towards theism, that's good. So Philip, if you want to do what Scholar Fiction did, and he decided he wasn't an atheist anymore, now he is a deist. That's the belief that God created the world, but he doesn't take an active role in it. Fine, start with that. Work your way towards the truth. Okay, can any atheist provide any evidence that their mental faculties would recognize truth? Yeah, you should. Hopefully you seek the truth. The atheist is good evidence for Christ, Katie says. So hi, everybody in the chat. I want to say welcome to all of you. I wouldn't worry about angel question. Who created your personality, SJ? Who created Richard Dawkins' personality? So I can say there is a certain level of personality. You have to have, one of the things that I think every person kind of fights, and that was mentioned also by Cliffe, Knechtle. It was mentioned by him. He talks about pride, and I think we all have a little bit of pride in our personalities that we have to figure out how to overcome. So we are given a certain set of tools, and they can vary as a function of whatever tools our parents, our grandparents, our great-grandparents were given, as far as our mindset and our personalities, and whether we'd be willing to serve the Lord or not. And we were also given a set of experiences and the people around us, and we don't get to choose our parents. And so some people have pretty awful parents. And so you can take different steps through your life to address whether or not you had good parents, a good upbringing, or awful parents and an awful upbringing. And you can also choose how you're going to address whether or not you decide to follow God. And so that's just a big choice. I can't seem to keep up with the chat questions here. So, okay. So if reality is subjective, then there is no right and wrong. All right. So that's in laudidus profita. So that's a deal. Reality is not subjective. That takes faith to believe. We don't know if it's objective, as it's unfalsifiable. Okay. So I've got pretty interesting conversations going on in the chat. So I'm going to give you kind of the bird's eye view of some of the views that I have here. So I had Michael Beverly. I would welcome Michael Beverly if he wants to respond to my video, or if he wants to, any of you, if you ever want to come on my channel and discuss things, I'm welcome to that. I tend to be really busy during the school year. Right now, I've got a couple weeks off, but we're also going to be work with relatives for much of this time, so I won't have the opportunities to get and make videos. But I did want to invite people to my channel, and especially even if you have opposing views to mine, if you want to come on my channel and debate somebody else. I'm not really into debates myself, but if you want to do that, I can set up debates. I have done that in the past. If you'd like to learn more about Christianity and why I believe Christianity is the truth, I'd certainly like to share that with you. You might want to know why I decided to, I've moved around quite a bit politically. I guess my point with the politics was, I think when I grew closer to Christ, I decided that conservative values were the way to go. I know people who actually went the opposite. So they became atheists, and then they gave up conservative values and shifted more liberal. I think a couple of examples of that is like Jen with one N on Twitter, and Kelly, what's her last name? I'm forgetting Kelly's last name, but she calls herself Godless Granny. So I think they were both more conservative at one point, and as they became more atheists, they became more left-leaning. So it's kind of an interesting thing when you notice that going on. So in summary, I can say that as we go, I think I made a mention that we do have suffering in the world. I think that forms the bottom line on the major arguments that atheists have against Christianity. The major argument is that there's suffering in the world. However, as I said before, Jesus showed us that that's exactly the sort of system that he set up when he himself came down and was tortured and beaten and crucified. He himself showed us exactly what life is all about. We will be suffering, but we will be glorified after that. So thank you all for coming in today. I hope if you like this kind of content, you'll like and subscribe, and do come again. And just remember, whether you eat, drink, or whatever you do, do it all for God's glory. Thank you.